Good afternoon. This is Ernie Ramirez and the E29 Journeys podcast. Today, I am very, very fortunate to have a 40-year friend, probably more than that. I don't know. We'd have to check. But today, we were lucky enough to get Rialto City Councilman Joe Baca Jr. in for a chat. Again, fortunately, Fridays have been a little bit more open for most of us, so we're able to get everyone in and then have some of these chats and hopefully put out some good content. But today, I'd like to start out by thanking again our sponsors, 100% Media. They do all the editing, the videography. They do all the studio setup for us. Again, as you see, Chihuahua Cerveza, located in Newport Beach, expanding across the country, now in Florida, Texas, soon to be Albuquerque, New Mexico. So if you're out in Newport, swing by the brewery there and say hello to everyone. Try some of their food and some of their fine beers. Also, Adam Schwartz, Real Estate. Adam affords us the opportunity to come into his nice office and lovely studio and put this show on for you every week. So, again, without further ado, as they say, I'd like to introduce Mr. Joe Baca Jr.
Well, thank you, Ernie. Thank you for having me, and happy 4th of July weekend to all the listeners, Ernie and your family. Glad to see you're well and safe, so thanks for having me today.
Oh, it's fun. It's always good. This is probably the first time we've had a chance to chat off the field since the last time you had one of your clinics out in San Bernardino. I think that was in January, so it's been a few months. But so what have you been up to?
Well, since the whole COVID crisis, I teach. People that don't know, my day job is I'm a public school teacher. I teach at Rialto High School, and I had the opportunity to coach softball for 9 years. And I'm also on the Rialto City Council. I've been 14 years on the Rialto City Council, and I was a California State Assemblyman for 2 years. So it's been a long journey, but, I really enjoy being a public servant, not only as a city councilman, but also as a public school teacher. And I just finished coaching my last year a year ago. And the thing that I am proud of is that we're defending league champs at San Andreas League, Rialto High School. So it's a proud moment, and I'll still carry that title another year because of COVID. So they didn't get a chance to play this year, which is very unfortunate for many of the kids.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking right now, I was thinking there's kind of a different, interesting way that you and I can go, because you have a lot more insight just because of the nature of the job duties that you have with the city council, being in education. There's so many different things that you're probably more involved in than some of the other coaches that we've had on. As an educator, going into the current situation, how do you see things coming back? I'm sure you've heard a lot of different ideas about how the school year is going to look, or how things are going to look for high schools, middle schools, elementary schools.
Yeah, well, a couple things is, one is every district has a different idea of what they want to do. Some districts want to come back full blown in the fall. There's other districts that want to go strictly distance learning, and there's other districts that want to go distance learning and bring students back, bring a hybrid version of bringing them back. So it's very, very challenging. One of the hard things as educators is they have to meet CDC guidelines, it's safety. So safety for the kids and the families is always a challenge. But also they have to work closely with the unions and get all the teachers and classified employees to buy in. So it's going to be a challenge for this fall. And I think the hardest thing for all of our kids is their social and emotional well-being. I mean, kids are having a difficult time at home and going into depression. So that's been a big challenge.
Yeah. Have you, some of the other coaches I know that we've talked to, they've kept in contact with some of their players, because as a teacher, you have one type of relationship with your students, but as a coach, it's a little bit more of a family-oriented kind of group.
Yeah, I've been able to keep in touch with some of my former players, and the great thing is they'll ask for a letter of recommendation, they'll send an email, I'll run into them in the public. And I guess the difference for me, I live in the community. So I run into students and former players all the time. So that's a little bit different situation for me. Not all the teachers live in the community they work in. So that's one of the great things about living and working in the same community.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, because you being a longtime Rialto native, and that's one of the things that we've chatted with other coaches about, too. I'm, again, a little bit self-serving, but you're in the same way. We kind of grew up in the same area. Same schools, same high school, and everything channeled into that. And I think that sense of community might be a little bit more beneficial now to some of the younger players, especially with situations like this that none of us have gone through, as opposed to maybe some of your students that are a little bit more transient as far as changing districts, changing schools, things like that. How do you see things maybe starting up athletics-wise, I don't know if you've heard anything about that, or you've kind of maybe had any discussions with any other coaches or school board members?
Well, one of the things that I know that is the CC2A, the College Athletic Association, they canceled the whole fall season. They canceled the whole fall season. Our school district has talked about having no fall sports, so no football, no volleyball, no women's golf in the fall. So that's a big challenge. And, the great thing, Ernie, you and I have had the opportunity to do is we had our opportunity.
Right.
And for a lot of these kids, they're not getting that chance, and they can't do these years over. And the great thing about team sports is obviously the social and emotional well-being, but whether you're on a championship program or a really bad program, it's that camaraderie, those friendships, the social interaction, the relationships you build for many years. I mean, look at you and I. We've known each other for many years, and sports has kind of kept us in touch with each other.
Yeah.
So those are the things that many of these kids are missing out.
Yeah, and that's tough because, as you mentioned, they don't get those years back. And I think for the kids moving forward, it was kind of a wake-up call now, because there was a little bit of a trend with a lot of younger, maybe from middle school up, being a little bit more introverted through video games, and the only interaction they had. I mean, you and I could play on a video game and still chat back and forth, but it's not the same as that conversation. One of the things that we talked about before we came in here was the fact that I've had an opportunity to do Zoom meetings or online meetings, but that's still old school, face-to-face, sit down and just talk is something that I think is missing. And I think just the conversation that they would get at school or the socialization is probably going to be the thing that they might feel the most going forward, because I don't know too many situations that a good conversation is never going to be acceptable.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point, and socialization is a very big part of being in school. The other big thing that's a big challenge is having the opportunity to motivate and challenge those kids, because you see them every day. And honestly, as a teacher and coach, I mean, we see our kids more than we see the students more than we do our own kids. I mean, We're seeing them 5 days a week. We're having an opportunity to encourage them if they need help. In a Zoom meeting, you might have them for maybe half hour, an hour, and then you don't see them again. So it becomes very, very challenging having the hands-on contact, especially with some of the younger kids or the kids that need a lot more help and motivation.
Now, did you mention that? Did you have to do online classes after March?
Yeah, we did strictly online classes, basically the whole fourth quarter. And the way it was done is the kids were told that their grades were not going to go down, but they used that opportunity to bring their grades up. And I would have to say students were very responsive during that time. They actually did their work, and it was challenging, but not the same. I mean, the thing I missed as a teacher, and I remember telling them before spring break, hey, graduation, I'm either going to give you a handshake or a hug. And, we did the drive-through graduation.
Yeah.
It brought some closure, but it just wasn't the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Had you had much experience with Zoom meetings and classes and things? Maybe in the political side you might have, but had you done that?
No, but I have now.
Yeah.
I'm not a big techie guy, but, I've been forced to do Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
And, it's what it is. I think it's kind of COVID's forced things to expedite, not just the Zoom meetings, online shopping, the way we do business.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things, too, that we've discussed. I think sometimes, for lack of a better word, nature forces us to evolve, whether we're ready to or not. And I think that in our school district, anyway, Harupa, the kids get the Chromebooks and they get access to that early. But my experience has been that they haven't used them to their fullest potential. And I think now you see more and more colleges going to online classes, and that's actually helped some of your schools like Grand Canyon, University of Phoenix really expand CBU. And I think that is something that our high school kids need to start learning anyway, because that's kind of the wave of the future for the colleges. It gives you more access, and in some cases it gives you a little bit more feasible financial commitment to the school rather than the actual in-class time. So I don't know that that's a completely bad thing, but the sports side of it is going to be really tough to overcome.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. And now that these kids are applying for colleges, how are they going to view them as far as extracurricular activities?
Yeah.
Now there's not very many opportunities to do community service and service clubs and sports, athletics, all these different things that can't be done now.
Yeah. And then, the mental side, as you mentioned before, of athletics is something that for a lot of kids, that's an outlet. You can still do a lot of the solo things now safely, but it's not the same as that group. You can go for a run, you can work out in your garage, you can work out at the park, but anything solo like that is not going to give you the same stimulation or the same benefits that working as a group or understanding that team camaraderie. That's something that's going to benefit you in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and I think competition is good. You can't really have competition when you're isolated, and it's very, very challenging. I think the competition forces some of these kids to excel, to compete, to work harder, and just the value of team sports and what it brings to a community. Community pride, whether it's playing for your club team, whether it's playing for your high school, middle school team, elementary school team, or even just a rec team. That camaraderie, no matter what level you play at, it just doesn't matter. That camaraderie makes a big difference in childhood development.
Well, listening to you talk, I forget, and I was going to ask you about this. You're very articulate, so that comes from the political side. So I was going to ask you, on the political side, how much did that camaraderie, that group environment through athletics help you with that? Because I think the nature of being a city councilman or being on boards and things like that has to come into play quite a bit.
No, I mean, part of it is you get a little competitive, but then you have to realize there's a lot of give and take. We're not always going to get our ways. And just like, for example, you and I understand through coaching is that every kid, every child, every athlete is different. So we have to understand that us as council members, colleagues, or communities, we all have different interests, different needs. What may be important to me may not be important to someone else. So we have to always look at other people and what are their interests and needs, not just what I think is good for the community, but what everybody thinks.
Yeah, and that comes from that group learning environment and having to figure out how we are going to come from different directions, but all try to get to the same place. And that's something I think, too, going forward, our kids might be missing a little bit because of this. But if they want to continue to grow, they've got to figure out other avenues to do it. So on that end, let's kind of backtrack a little bit. So playing baseball, I kind of know your backstory, but let's go back to the beginning as far as you want. If you want to go back to Rialto Eastern and just kind of bring us up to how you became Rialto City Councilman after teaching after baseball.
Sure. Well, me and Ernie actually grew up in Rialto together. We played athletics at Rialto Eastern Little League. I went to Morgan Elementary School, Frisbee Junior High, which they don't have anymore, Eisenhower High School, and then like all, we thought we were going to become professional athletes. So I went to Valley College, and I think that's when I realized I'm not going to be a professional baseball player. We're playing UCLA, Cal State Fullerton, and you realize these guys all throw 90, and you're just not used to seeing that kind of competition. But I continued to play baseball, played at Cal State San Bernardino, got to go to Division III College World Series. And then shortly after that, when I graduated, I was briefly in the private sector. Then I went into the public sector, became a correctional officer. And I saw the life of how people were living in prison. I said, there's more I can do than a correctional officer. So then I became a probation officer. So I worked for the county of San Bernardino, working with minors and adults, a lot of preventative programs. And then I felt, I can do more, and then became a public school teacher. So I taught in the Colton Joint Unified School District, and then came over to Rialto and began coaching. So I coached for a couple years, and then after that I ran for the California State Assembly. So I ran in 2004, and I served at the time when Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor. And so I got to meet the governor, and then ran for state senate and lost. And honestly, that was probably, Ernie, the best thing that happened to me, because when I lost that seat, I ran for local city council, Rialto City Council, and I was elected in 2006. And I've really learned a lot in local government. And the thing about local government, as opposed to maybe state and federal, a lot of people don't know what you do in state and federal government. But in local government, they know if that pothole's done. They know if that road's fixed. They know if that park's been cleaned up. Yeah. They know if that new development's coming into your community. Those things people can see and touch. The federal, state level, people don't see that. So I was elected in 2006. So I'm now serving my fourth term in the Rialto City Council. And something I'm very proud of, and you would probably appreciate this, is that through the Renaissance, which is our big development in Rialto, we were able to get a lot of proceeds from the land sale. And with that proceeds, we've reinvested back in the community. And me being an athlete, I believe parks are important to our communities, especially those that can't afford. So we have Joe Sampson Park on the south end. We invested about $7.5 to $8 million. And the one you would appreciate is Frisbee Park. We put almost $18 million into Frisbee Park, adding 2 additional fields, dog park, skate park. And it's going to be a state-of-the-art park and probably one of the largest investments in the whole region.
And that it is a sense of pride to me. You know, I think, and everyone's got their own opinion. You know, we've talked about this with other coaches, how during the recruiting process, and you probably experienced this with your players, there's that urge when you're younger to want to get out of town. You know, I want to see things differently, and sometimes you don't realize that what you have at home made who you are. And so sometimes giving back is probably far more gratifying than moving on somewhere. And so when I see things and I see you post these different developments, or I was actually pretty pumped because Adam is actually building some homes out in Rialto with a developer. And I said, you know, there's always room for growth in any town, you know, just because economy or population dips, there's always people that can come and bring that back if they just have the right motivation. So it always does me proud to see you still working for that, because, you know, in a way we grew up together. So what you do is still part of me, and I still take pride in everything that we did coming up through Rialto, because every step we've taken in the past puts us right here where we are. So, I mean, everything you do there is great, and I love seeing that. And it's always given me that little sense of pride when I see things, you know, kind of somebody fighting for the old town, you know, that I enjoy seeing that.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that, you know, obviously with Facebook and social media, we can keep in touch with people, and people see what you're doing. And people, former teachers, former residents, people that you and I grew up with, they always post nice comments of seeing the positive things in Rialto. So it kind of makes you feel good knowing that you're making a difference.
Yeah, well, I mean, because it always will be home to us. And when you see things become more up to date, or be cleaned up, or be modified for the next generation, it always gives you a sense of pride. You know, I still joke with our players. I always try to schedule games with Angel over at Eisenhower just because I want to go back, you know. Sure. I always like going to Fiscalini in the summer. That's one of the things I miss now. One, because I know where all the Mexican food places are. So for lunch, and then it's close to my parents' house, so I can always swing by and visit. So it's always nice going back and seeing things, and, you know, and seeing things change. You know, change is always good, and sometimes it might be slow to come, but it's always going to be better for things in the long run. So I'm actually glad that you're doing that, and I appreciate the work you're still doing with that. So getting into your after, I didn't know you were corrections. That was actually something that I'm kind of going back to. So when you were out of Cal State, where did you start your corrections at? Where was your first?
California State Prison, LA County. So I was commuting from Rialto to Lancaster.
Oh, wow.
So that was about an hour and a half one way, 3-hour round trip drive.
Yeah, that's tough.
It was tough. And level 4s and level 3s, and for the public that don't know, the toughest criminals in the state, California. You'd work in ad seg, so inmates were separated. So I did just about every assignment as a correctional officer.
So I imagine that kind of gives you, as you had mentioned, a little bit of motivation to make changes or make improvements or see things, because you kind of see people at the bottom of their life experience, you know. So to be a part of that, what made you go into the political side after that? What motivated you to do that?
Well, obviously, you know, my father, you know, all the years he did as a public servant, from community college member to assembly member, state senator, U.S. Congress. And for years, people would ask me, are you going to be like your father? Are you going to run for office? I have no interest. And at one time, I didn't have any interest. And I realized, look, you know, I live in this community. It's my way of giving back. And it's not about the position, the title, the influence. It's about being in a position to help others, and you got to remember why you're there. And it's easy to forget because you get attention, people want your time, but you have to realize why you're there, and you always have to remember the residents and keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's, you know, when you see right now they're in such high profile. Anybody that's in city, state, any kind of official position right now is getting a lot of attention, positive and negative. And so I think there's a lot of people that might have intentions of serving their community, but to go through the steps that you've gone through and the climb and the rung, that is a competitive arena. You know, most people don't see it that way, but some of the things that you've gone through, can you kind of explain, just for me anyway, how you actually go about getting involved in that? I mean, what did you have to do to transition from private sector, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, what helps is obviously, you know, being involved in the community. Like for me as a public school teacher in the community, you develop relationships with residents. You always encourage people to get involved, to volunteer, whether it's being on a commission, whether it's volunteering with the local service club, but getting active in the community, doing your part in voting. A lot of people don't vote, and realizing the importance of voting and what it means. And, even though we may disagree, one of the things I think we have to do a better job as a society and as a country is, respectfully disagree. We all have different opinions. We all look through lenses differently. We all have different cultures, different values. But we have to learn to accept one another for our differences and always try to do what's in the best interest of our community.
So actually, on that note, with all the things going on right now, what would be a suggestion from you if someone wanted to be more involved in their community? Maybe not to the extent where they were run for an office, but what's a good start for maybe even some of the high school kids out there, some of the college kids that might feel compelled right now to be more involved, something that they could feel that satisfaction and maybe learn and grow in that arena?
It's actually a good question, and that kind of leads to maybe some of the things. So I'll give you an example. I had a student ask me to write a letter of recommendation, a former player. And when I wrote the letter, I says, give me all the things you're involved in. And one of the things they had is they only had softball and GPA, which is not bad. I mean, softball is a good extracurricular activity. But when you're applying for college, you have to look at what separates you from the other thousands of people applying.
Right.
So getting involved in your community, sometimes what happens is they have service clubs, the Kiwanis Club that they have on campus. There's student commissions that different cities have, volunteering for any after-school activities they may have beyond just athletics, because sports isn't for everybody.
Sure.
And you have to let people know there's other opportunities out there involved with your teachers, any community cleanups that they have. So really, it's important to resume build to separate you from the others. And when you're applying for college, what separates you from the rest? And when you resume build, and the hard thing for young people to understand is sometimes you have to give up your personal time, a little bit of sacrifice. We all want instant gratification, click of a button, we want it all now. And technology has really spoiled us, but just being a little patient, kind of getting after it, and being involved in your school. A lot of good things you can do at this school. ASB, clubs, a lot of good things.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we had talked about that a few minutes ago. Now going forward with the group type things or the athletics and the things that kids may have put as extracurricular on their college resumes, they may not be there. So looking outside the box, finding other ways. There's so many stories now where you see young people doing things for not fundraising, but for community projects, for nonprofits and things like that. So I think being able to maybe steer some of our younger students, players, in a direction where they could actually be more involved in their city. And I think that's kind of where we're all headed right now. I think it has to be city by city, state by state, and just kind of creating more of a focus on what I can change. And I think a lot of times, I know growing up, you might have been more privy to it because of the positions your dad held, but we never really looked at things because we had our hands full with sports. So I think that is important to get that out there. So is there, if you were to go to, say, a community website, Rialto City or Riverside City or San Bernardino City, is there access on there where people can get involved?
Yeah, they could get involved, and you made me think about other things. There's a lot of good nonprofits, like, for example, one that's called Community Action Partnership. There's many community feedings they can go, because people are having a hard time. People are hurting, with the economy. So there's different things like you do if you want to feed. Different organizations do that. You can go to churches. A lot of times churches do a lot of community feedings for seniors. So a lot of those things can go on. You can do within the cities and nonprofits that are still active. Even though COVID's going on, they're finding ways to try to give back to the community.
Good, yeah. Because I know we do have some of our players even that need that community service during normal times. And it's always nice to have a direction to point them in, because a lot of them want to stay in that sports realm. And so we actually provide a spot for them to help out coaching or to do things like with your foundation when you have the athletic events. So it's always nice for me to figure out some other way for them to do it. But it's also something I think that now people have to really look and get involved in. On that regard, when you started into your political side, I'll call it, did you initially start with a school board, or did you just go right into city? I don't know how that works, the sequence.
I kind of bypassed a lot of it, went straight to the state legislature. And a lot of it was just because of my father's goodwill and a lot of good things. But the great thing going back to the city council, I've got to develop my own reputation, develop who I am. Because a lot of people sometimes, I've always been in the shadow of my father, and I love my father, and he's done great things. Very proud of him. I mean, he's done a lot in our community, helped a lot. But then, the hardest challenge is developing your own identity.
Sure.
And being on the Rialto City Council, now you have a track record of either accomplishments, and those are things that we've been able to do as a city councilman.
Well, I mean, in a way, that's also a good thing, too, because like any trade, if your parents are teachers, then you learn a little bit faster track on how to be a teacher or whatever profession. But being that was the realm your dad was in, it helped because, again, trying to start anything from scratch is always difficult. So I think that probably helped you. And Joe Sr. casts a pretty big shadow. I still get a kick out of listening when you hand him the mic and you say just a few words.
He's not shy.
Yeah, hey, that's perfect. I mean, he always gets his message across, and he's a really personable guy. And actually, it's funny because I think about when I used to see him in Little League. Dad wasn't shy with the weights. He was a pretty stocky guy. Played professional softball, right?
For many years. He played for about 22 years. And it's interesting as a coach, and you talk about men's softball.
Yeah.
They have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it was huge.
Yeah. Yeah. It was all over. I mean, and now it's slow pitch. I don't even know if there's fast pitch softball anymore.
Very little.
Yeah.
Very little fast pitch. Back east, I think there's a 40 and over league that played 3 games once a month, but it's not nearly the competition it used to be.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I know there was a team in San Bernardino, right?
Yeah, my father had a team. They were the Budweiser Stars.
Okay.
No knock on Chihuahua, but
well, now they would be the Chihuahua. Yeah. But Budweiser, there wasn't a lot of beer selection back then. But yeah, that's interesting to know because I like seeing things on Facebook, and when they pop up the history of San Bernardino, a lot of things that you forget. There was one a few weeks ago about the old arena that was right next to where the stadium is now, where they used to have boxing, and to look at some of the fighters that came through there, and wrestling, to look at some of the Mexican wrestlers that would come through. And then I think there was an article of maybe a year or two back where they talked about the railroad and how fighters would come through, and San Bernardino was a hub. So from Phoenix, they'd go to San Bernardino and then down to LA. And I think that it's always neat to see what a deep culture San Bernardino has as far as in the whole history of California in general. San Bernardino was one of the biggest hubs in the country at that point, to see all that. But it's always a kick when you give your dad the mic and let him go out and talk. And so on that note, let's skip forward a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your foundation, or I know about it, but maybe tell the folks listening.
Yeah, about 16 years ago, our family started a foundation, the Joe Baca Foundation, in honor of my father. And one of the things we've been able to do for many years is give out scholarships to high school seniors, sometimes junior college, sometimes local high schools, and really try to focus on the high schools within the area. Because, it's an underserved area. Many people struggle financially. And, whatever the amount is, you always tell the kids, look, it's not the fact that it's a lot or little, it's the fact that somebody gave you, and always appreciate that. So we've done scholarships, we've done many athletic clinics in years past. We did basketball clinics, we did soccer clinics. The one we've really stayed consistent, the one you've been a part of every year, has been our baseball clinic. And we've had a great partnership with the Inland Empire 66ers. We work with them, we hosted at the 66er Stadium. And the big thing for me is I got to go as a clinic as a kid. Mm-hmm. I went to the Dodger clinics that Valley College used to host many years ago. I mean, look at all the Dodgers that came through there: Oral Hershiser, Mike Scioscia, Dave Stewart, Bill Russell, Dave Brock, and all those great Dodgers that actually came through the Inland Empire. And that kind of inspired me to do a clinic. So actually, my first clinic, I was a high school coach at Bloomington High School. We did it at Kessler Park, and we had 20 kids. Mm-hmm. So, and we've had as many as 800, which you've been part of, and that was tough.
Yeah. The chaos is fun in a little bit, but it does get chaotic when you have that many young kids out there. Yeah. So on that level, when you were talking about that, I do remember going back as a kid. It felt as though there was more access in that way to the players, because it felt as though that community involvement with the major league teams, because we didn't have minor league teams back then. They hadn't put a Cal League out in our area. So it was either go to Anaheim or go to Dodger Stadium, and that was it. And so when they did come out and there was going to be a camp or a clinic at Valley College or wherever they would have it, it was always a big deal because that was the only time you'd get to see those guys. And then now one of the cool things I liked about your foundation was that when you put these kids out there, they're out there with minor league ball players. They're out there on a minor league stadium. I mean, granted, we started at the Frisbee Park, Kessler Park, but now that they get access to that, and I think about at our age at that same time, we would have never even been able to get on a college field other than Valley College. And that was Dodger Stadium to us back then. And then to be able to play at that 10 years later, it's an experience that a lot of kids, I really wish they would get to see that, from the ground up. And so when you started the foundation, was the actual goal for just baseball, or do you still have any additional sports you want to expand to in the future?
Well, as we go into the future, we'd like to go back and do basketball again, and would like to do soccer clinics. And you and I know when we were young, soccer was not a big sport.
No.
But I mean, it's national, international sport. And at that time, when Chivas USA was here, we had a great partnership with them. We got the Galaxy to come out at one time. But, bringing some of those ones back, they're a lot of work.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing, I want to share with the community is we don't charge.
Right.
Free.
Right.
A lot of times you go to these camps, they're very expensive. And we do it free of charge. We raise money. We feed the kids. We provide them with a T-shirt. We get raffle prizes donated to the kids. And, we allow our either previous major leaguers or minor league stars to sign autographs for the kids. So it's fun. I get giddy over that. And just the fact that, these people come back, and some of the people that have come through have made it to the major leagues. And one of the ones that I talk about is Vince Velasquez. He was 12 years old when he came through our first clinic, and now he's pitching for the Philadelphia Phillies in the starting rotation. So that's kind of makes you feel good.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things, too. I think just going out there and having been a part of it, I think the second year was when you were at Frisbee, right?
Yes.
I think that's when I came on. But watching it grow, and it's kind of interesting to me, and actually, again, that sense of pride the last couple of years where you've had the high schools involved and watching the younger guys. And, as we get to be our age, we kind of feed off that energy from the high school and the college guys, because you kind of see that they're just a little bit larger version of the kids that are out there. And so watching all of these high school coaches come out and watching all these high school players start to understand that they have a role in the community, because to those kids, you are a big leaguer. To those kids, they do look up to you because you're playing at a level they haven't attained yet. And so having that sense of pride from the community passed down is something that's huge to me. We talk about that all the time, is you're just a link in the chain. If we can keep our link strong, then it's going to make it stronger for someone else down the line. So I really enjoy the fact that you've brought the high schools out and you've got them more involved.
Yeah, I think that's great we bring up the high schools. One is to get them involved, but the fact that they can take everything that they've learned, which I like your idea of having them do the drills that they've done at their high schools with their coaches, travel ball coaches, and actually sharing those things with the kids that may or may not have been exposed to those drills. And you and I know that coaching has gotten so much better over the years.
Yeah.
It's so much more advanced, as opposed to you and I with 9 kids sitting out there throwing the ball up, get one, and that was our practice.
Or get in front of it, but let it hit you in the chest. That's always my favorite one now. Now I know, hey, I didn't know there was an option, use your glove. But, the other thing, too, is what I enjoy when I work with our players and talking to some of the players that we've had out. A lot of these young men that are in high school, some of them might even be in roles of big brother, maybe even almost a father role, because dual jobs in the home. Maybe they're home more with their younger brothers and sisters. And so a lot of them are learning, I think, some of the protection skills, the parenting skills that they would need, and that's one of the things that with baseball, there's always different things you can learn other than the basics of fielding a ground ball, throwing a ground ball. So when those guys get out there, I like the fact that you can see some of them kind of put the macho away, and they'll get down on the knee and show that little guy how to play catch, or show that, kind of go a little gentler with the ball, not to hurt that kid. And you start seeing those father instincts coming in, or you start seeing those big brother instincts, because ultimately baseball is just another way for you and I and coaches to to help build men, to help build good people, good citizens that want to come back and help your community. And so that's the part that I really enjoy seeing those younger guys out there on the field with us.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that the father figure. For those that community don't know, Victor Vodnik from Rialto High School, drafted by the Atlanta Braves. He was now top 15 in the Atlanta Braves system, Rialto High School graduate. But he came out to our clinic a couple times. And I remember you mentioned that father figure. He's got, 7 younger siblings. So you can tell he knew how to work with little kids.
Yeah.
And watching him out there interact with the kids and the drills, I mean, it was fun to watch.
Yeah.
Made you feel good.
Yeah. And that's almost something that you don't really even need to have a coaching background to do that. That's just having that desire to want to help a younger human being, for lack of a better word, succeed, and one of the things that I've discussed and I've told people in the job that I do now, the hardest thing was to take that competitiveness and humble it, because at this point, everyone that comes through your door has more baseball knowledge than you did, because they have so much more access to videos, to coaching, to clinics, to camps. So when they come in, there's a totally different way that you have to learn how to interact with players, and you've seen it now from, like you mentioned, when we were taught to now being a coach. It's an entirely different culture when you're working with even high school players.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. And one of the things I always tell people, whether it's coaching, politics, or just life, you can take a little bit from every person that gives you direction or coaching. So you may learn one thing from one coach, but you may learn something else from another coach. You can always continue to grow, always get better. Take one little piece from every little camp, every little coaching lesson you have. So you can take bits and pieces and things, and it's going to make who you are as a player. And we're all, whether it's athletics or academics, we're all different. And we have to realize, hey, if we can improve any way we can, that's always important.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things, and you kind of touched on this earlier, is that when we're working with a community, with a group, with a team, sometimes we make it easy to find all the negative things about a coach, because on the side that I'm at, sometimes you hear a lot of complaining from the high school kids or the parents about, my coach doesn't do this, my coach doesn't do that. Well, most of the time there's different avenues that coaches do well. Some guys are very good practice planners. Some guys are very good with drills. Some guys are very good game coaches. Some guys are very good as far as communication. So there's all elements of coaching, but find what that coach does well and try to learn from that, like you had mentioned, because I'm sure you can think of the list of coaches you've had. And as you go back now as an adult, you know what? He was really good with drills. He was really good with this. And I always think back about Coach Longsworth. And when you think about the way he set up that practice and the way we ran about it, he was 30 years ahead of his time. Way
ahead.
Yeah, it drove us crazy. But when you look at it now, I was like, that's the best way to do it. It was most efficient. Everybody knew where they had to go. We all had little roles and routines. And it just seemed like at the time you don't appreciate that.
Yeah, you know what? Larry Longsworth was ahead of his time. And speaking of people, I just wished him a happy birthday about a week ago. And he says, hey, Joe, thanks for all the good things you're doing in Rialto. But he was ahead of his time, and I probably was too stubborn or not mature enough at the time to realize basically what he was saying when he was teaching us to stay inside the ball.
Yeah.
Stay inside the ball.
Yeah.
Go the other way. And he didn't realize till later, Mike Trout's doing it now. All these big league players are doing it now.
Yeah.
This was back in, the 80s?
Yeah. And, and I think back to Jerry Magnus, who was also one of my favorites. Totally different guy as far as his approach. And I always gravitated to listening to him talk because he always had that same low-key, nothing was ever out of control. He would always have that calming influence. I remember going to the mound and he would be talking to the pitchers, and I would just like listening to him because I was thinking, wow, I wasn't really panicked, but I feel a lot better now just listening because he had everything under control. You always felt like that, to where you have those other coaches that always want to elevate their voice and they just kind of create that, man, is this really that bad of a situation? So learning that from those guys was something that I remember, the communication part of it, because it was always a different delivery from coaches. And I always kind of gravitated to that same low-key. Benedict was like that too. Very stern, but also you always had that everything's going to be all right kind of feeling when he left the talk, or when you finished the conversation. You kind of got that feeling that, hey, we can always reset and we can figure this out. It's not, the building's not on fire right now, so let's just kind of go with it. So those communication skills are the things that I think I've remembered the most from the playing days of anything else.
No, you bring up a good point. I saw an interview on ESPN this morning. They were kind of talking about Bill Belichick, how he's not a rah-rah kind of guy, but you're going to win.
Yeah.
And I think it's just style.
Yeah.
Longsworth was not a rah-rah kind of guy. He was very cold, very stone-faced, but he cared.
Yeah.
And he got us to win. We were competitive. And when I got to meet Longsworth personally, we played handball. He says, hey, anyone that wants to challenge me in handball. And I was the only player that stayed. And you got to know him as a person and realize he really cares. He cares about his kids. He cares about his students. And, all coaches have different deliveries and different styles. But, you can take what you can from everybody. Even me as a coach, it was challenging because people weren't used to my style. They thought, this guy's crazy.
Yeah.
But I was just very demanding of my players, high expectations. And, for me, I expected them to balance, academics and athletics. And I always told them, I says, look, if you can't do both, it's okay. If you don't want to commit, I'm not upset. I just need to know that you're going to commit. And that was my big thing as a coach.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you touched on that because a couple weeks ago, I had Joe Villa in here from Cal Poly, a younger guy and, really laid back. And I told him I really like his demeanor, very articulate. And I said, it's one of those things where when you get in front of this camera now, you're working into, for you and I, this is a medium that we're not totally comfortable with because it's not something we grew up with. But for high school players and younger now, this is what they're used to. So it gives them an opportunity to know about you, to know about him, to know about other coaches, because a lot of times you don't get the time to sit down with them and let them get to know you on a personal level. There's just too many people and too many times, and your job doesn't allow you the time to sit down with every one of your students and let them really understand who Joe Baca Jr. is and connect, And I think this is one of those ways where I really enjoy doing this because anybody that's watching can look and go, okay, here's a gentleman that coaches. He's been through this. He's done this. He's done this. But he's just like the guy that I know from my dad or the guy that I know from work. And it makes everyone a little bit more approachable. And I think that's something sometimes because now in society we all have these walls, and I think that makes it a little intimidating and a little uncomfortable sometimes, especially for younger kids. I don't really remember what it's like to be 15 or 16 again, but, it is nice that you mentioned that. And I think this is what I enjoy about it because now people that see this know you. And I think that's going to make things a little bit more approachable just one step at a time.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that sometimes on a couple levels as a coach, I'd put up a wall and it wasn't, I just wanted the kids to know, look, I'm your coach and you're the player. But what I would always do is a team bonding trip.
Sure.
So they got to see me loosen up a little bit. They got to see me in a different atmosphere. We did a lot of road trips with our players. And you try to make it fun, for players. You try to make it fun and interesting. Otherwise, kids get bored.
Yeah.
Kids get bored. You mix it up and you stay consistent with the kids. But, like you said, people got to get to know you. Sometimes people even think as city councilmen, they're like, you teach? You have a job? It's like, no, this is just a part-time.
Yeah.
I got to make a living, got a family to feed.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting you mentioned that where people have certain expectations or certain ways they view either electeds or coaches or people in a position of authority.
Well, and I think though, like for you, you wear so many different hats. Once people get to know you, then they realize, hey, you know what? He really doesn't have to be out here doing this for us, but he is because he wants to make the community better or he wants to help our team get better. He could pack it up right at 3:30, go home, hang out with his family and just do that. But he's taking his own time to go and do that. And so sometimes people don't step away from those expectations and give the appreciation, not that that's what you're after, but don't appreciate that fact that, hey, he doesn't have to do this. And I think sometimes in general, if people step back and do that, it'll make things a lot easier to compromise, to work with and things like that. So, that being said, with the foundation, when you've started doing the baseball and the fields and things like that, how did you come about going into San Manuel from Frisbee Park?
Reaching out. And one of the things that happens in politics and just in life in general, and I want the listeners to understand is life is about relationships and reputation. And if you have a good reputation, people are going to open the doors for you. And one of the things that we've done with our baseball clinic, it was never about personal interest, self-interest. It was really about the community. And people start to see the things you're doing. then they're willing to open up to you, and people will open up to you more. But it's about building those relationships. And then when you have a relationship with San Manuel, they're doing a good thing. When people actually get to witness it firsthand, they says, this is good stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know Jason Martin, who's been at our clinic. Yeah. I mean, his dad witnessed. He says, wow, I love what you guys are doing. This is great. Look at all these kids, and none of them have to pay. Yeah. So, your reputation and relationships really open the doors for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because that's really been, again, for me anyway, I always feel that special connection with that facility there, because when we actually had it, it was at Fiscalini way back when the Spirit started, and then it moved over to that new stadium when they built that. But that's still something that, I'm really curious how your foundation can maybe grow in that stadium now because of the whole uncertainty with the minors and with the season just being canceled. But I've seen other minor league facilities kind of really go downhill once the team has left or once the season has ended, things like that. But I think there's an opportunity there for maybe you to grow in that stadium, because there's going to be a need to keep that active and to keep that upgraded. I would just hate to see that beautiful stadium just kind of be let go. So I'm curious how you could kind of piggyback that and maybe help it grow a little bit more, maybe twice a year.
Yeah, no, people are always looking for things to do. And the reason why we've always primarily done it in January is, one, it's a new year, but this is before all the travel starts, before all the leagues get going. Yeah. But I think twice a year is a great idea. Yeah. I mean, one time we did a fall one in October, and that one seemed to be pretty good too. But the biggest challenge is there's so many teams and organizations. Field space is always a challenge. I mean, you know how it is. Yeah. With travel groups, high school groups, rec groups. So getting field time is always a challenge. So finding a schedule that works for everybody is our biggest challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. I had always thought, just especially the last few years, you've had quite a few softball players come out, and I've always kind of wondered, how would it do if you had two separate, a baseball and a softball event? Get the local softball. Cal State San Bernardino Valley College, get some of those coaches involved. You get some of the other softball teams from the high schools, and just have it not necessarily as a very strong day, but more of a just get to know each other kind of day. Let the coaches come down and know the high school players, that around the restrictions, of course. But I always thought softball would be another good way to launch, because I think you could probably get a pretty good turnout for just softball as well.
Yeah, the biggest challenge, is probably girls softball is the most demanding women's sport in all of California. Yeah. They literally go year round, and trying to find that break when we can draw people in is always a challenge. Yeah. Because they go all the time. There's hitting lessons, there's physical fitness lessons, there's tournaments, there's friendlies. So that's always a challenge to try to find a good time for softball. But I think it's a great idea.
It's interesting you mentioned that too, because even right now I have some softball players that I offer weekend spots to. We can't. We're doing this. We're doing that. I'm thinking, you are? Because I don't know too many fields that are open, or I don't know too many, but they're finding a way to do it. But no, you're absolutely right. And so on the softball side, you had mentioned defending champions. So for your last game in March, how far along were you guys in the season?
Well, I stopped coaching in 2019. In 2020, Marcina Bertoldo took over as the coach, and I believe they only went 10 games in, and they were all preseason games, and they didn't start league. So they didn't get very far, for league. So what happened is, I know our athletic director kind of gave everyone that played softball the COVID-19 season. So it's a historic season, not, for a good thing, but I think the only good thing about this whole COVID thing in athletics, it's kind of given families a time to spend time together. Yeah. That's a silver lining in this.
There was an article that I read, and I don't remember who wrote it, but it was on I was on LinkedIn, and it's one of the questions that I had posed to some of the coaches that have come through, and I said, now that you've had all of this time off, sometimes when you're going and you're grinding and you're going through that season, you just get caught in that loop. You spend the time with your family that you get. You spend the time on the road. You know what your routine is. Now that you haven't had that pulling you away on the weekends, normally we probably wouldn't have time to sit down and do this on a Friday. You'd be busy doing something. So how hard is it going to be to go back and go, wow, you know what? I went 3 months without it. I went 4 months without it. What do I do? Dude, I really like this time I had with my family. I really appreciate that extra time. It's really nice to come home after school and relax. How do you think that's going to be for some guys?
Well, I think playing again, I think it's important. I think, once, this whole COVID goes by and people can start playing, I think it's a good thing. My advice, that I seen out there in the high school level was I seen people that didn't rest, let their bodies rest and recover. And the other thing I saw was a lot of burnout, where they just played so much they just didn't want to play anymore. And sometimes it was parent pressure. Sometimes they just wanted to be social. And that's the biggest challenge you see when they start becoming 16, 17. You see these student athletes that they want to start working. They want to start making money. So their priorities change. But, I always encourage parents, play as long as you can, do it as long as you can. Some of these travel trips are good family bonding time where they get to go out. But hopefully they can balance between, how much to push and still letting kids be a kid. That's always the challenge.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And again, I try to spin the positive on it and having conversations with different families and coaches and things. I said, well, sometimes you get a way to have your perspective forced and really step back and look at it because you wouldn't put yourself in that position on a normal basis. And for kids, I think sometimes, as you had mentioned with the parents, or you also get the idea that some of these kids are here not necessarily for what they want to do. They might have other interests, but they're either worried about the result if they ask for that time off, or worried about disappointing the parents or disappointing whoever they have at home. And I think there's a lot of times where this distance will give them an opportunity to look back and go, hey, you know what? I really liked being at home and practicing guitar, or I really like playing on my skateboard, or I really enjoyed that extra time I had to put into school. Because I know some kids that have told me that the last part of the year they actually had a chance to really focus on their grades and it wasn't as difficult as they thought. So I think there's going to be some changes, and I think that it's not always a bad thing, because I think sometimes kids need to really look at what they want to do. And in order to really become the best version of themselves, they need to find something that they really, really love. And with sports, sometimes you just get mentally locked in and you just do it because it's what you've always done.
Yeah, it becomes such a routine, such a routine. Even former high school players that come back to me, Baca, I'm used to your workouts. I mean, it was routine. Okay, weights on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, we have practice games, and you get in such a routine, and then all of a sudden it comes to a stop. It's like, okay, well, what do I do now? And you see a lot of that. But, I think it's good. I think it's good that kids get pushed and put in the time, but, they have to find themselves and find out what makes them tick. Yeah. And we've even talked to other coaches, and we've expressed to them that with the kids that we have today, in the teaching realm, you see that a lot of the things that we clung to as kids don't really exist anymore. The kids that we're teaching now, your high school kids, the middle school kids, a lot of the jobs and the ways that they're going to find an income don't even exist right now. There's so much that's being created. And I think by keeping yourself in a lane that maybe you're not completely comfortable with, you might be limiting yourself. There's so many things that you see people doing online, creating businesses, creating foundations, creating fundraisers, creating different ways to get out and help the community or to help the country, that sometimes the mainstream sports might be stifling some of those kids. And I think there's a lot more opportunity for them now to open up and see things and be more creative. Yeah, no, I think sports is good. I encourage people to do it if they can. Play as long as you can, because when you get our age, Ernie, your body breaks down. You can't do the things you used to do. I always encourage kids, if you love sports, play as long as you can. Yeah. Because there's going to be a day you can't play. But, it's all about that balance, being well-rounded, whether it's academics, athletics. I've seen some people focus so much on the athletics and neglected the academics. Yeah. So it's about balance. But, we're all going to find our lane, like you said, in life, and we have to figure it out. But like I said, live the dream as long as you can. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's actually one of the best things that I've heard from multiple coaches. It doesn't always have to end in a professional career. A lot of times the trip to get there, the friendships you develop, the disciplines you learn, the
interactions you have with fellow players and coaches. It's all about developing yourself to where you're going to be. You know, that coaching window, and as you know now with all the guys that have come through your clinics, it's not always going to end with a professional career at the Hall of Fame. You know, there's so very few people that end up there, and somewhere along that ladder you're going to jump off, and you're going to be a city councilman, you're going to be a teacher, you're going to be a father, you're going to be something else in the world, and that's going to be where you are going to be successful the most if you really focus on just trying to gain something from every aspect. So as far as that goes, with some of the kids that we have right now that come to the clinic, have you had any follow-up with some of the schools? I know there was one time we had some teachers that came out from, I think it was that 1 year where you had the 800 kids. Have you had any follow-up with any of the teachers, or any of the teachers that maybe have been to multiple camps or come out again?
Yeah, I've had a few coaches come out. I know that Coach Angel, teacher coach, and he's come to quite a few clinics. And I guess for me, Ernie, the big thing that's rewarding is, I think it was a couple of years ago, I had a girl that wrote a little note, handwritten note saying, thank you for the clinic. I would have never played sports, if it hadn't been for the clinic and the self-confidence it brought me. And even me as a teacher, I've had some of my former students bring their kids to the clinic. So it's those experiences that make you feel like, okay, it is making a difference. I mean, sometimes when you're putting it together, you're tired, you're hustling, you're collecting autographs, you're collecting items, you're buying T-shirts, doing all these things, and sometimes it can be tiring, but then you realize at the end, like, this was worth it. This was worth my time, that little gratification.
Yeah, it's a totally different medium to reach people. And on that note, so let me ask you this then. I'll give you a minute to just kind of finish up and wrap up about your foundation. If someone wanted to get involved, or if someone wanted to donate items or things like that to your foundation for, possibly the basketball or possibly the baseball side of it, is there a website for the foundation or a way to contact you that they could go to?
Yeah, the best way to do is they could text me
at
area code 909-725-3838, area code 909-725-3838. If they would like to make a donation or donate equipment, because a lot of times some of these kids come without gear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No gloves, so we have buckets of gloves. We always looking for balls. Equipment gets wore down over the years, but any way people can help and donate it means a lot.
Yeah, actually that's what brought it up to my attention, because I know that every year you have to scramble to find things for that. So there's a lot of players out there that either you outgrow your bats, your gloves. Most people have that bucket of baseballs or softballs in your garage. So if you're looking for something to do those, they can always go to a good cause. Every January, we're out at San Manuel Stadium, and we can always use those. If you haven't had a chance to come out, we'll get that information out when we figure out how everything's going to go from here on out. You'll see the flyers on Facebook and Instagram. So if you do have any items and things like that, please feel free. You can either contact me directly through YouTube or through our Instagram site, and we can get those donations all set. But in the meantime, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'm glad you came out. It was good to chat and catch up. Hopefully we can do a part 2. And then we can maybe we can do a remote one again from the field. Hopefully in January everything will be somewhat back to normal. I'm looking forward to just any chance to get back to on the field and games, and once everything's safe and workable again. So hopefully we can get to that soon. But in the meantime, I thank you coming out. I appreciate it, and we will catch you next time.
Okay, thanks for having me, Ernie. Appreciate it.
No problem. So again, thanks to Joe Baca Jr., Rialto City Councilman. Thanks to our sponsors. And until we meet again, we will see you.